Even though Team Fortress 2 is a game that incentivizes teamwork and coordination, a good soldier player is able to consistently isolate favorable duels by using his extreme mobility. The gunboats are the obvious choice for this playstyle because they allow the soldier to use his mobility much more often. Of course, there are many soldier loadouts that are viable, such as support soldier with a banner or a shotgun soldier, but the roamer soldier is definitely the most common and, in my opinion, the most fun. So what is the secret to success? I would say the key to success as a roaming soldier is knowing your matchups. Since soldier is so fast, he is able to dictate when he wants to fight an opponent. If a soldier sees a teammate engaged in a 1v1, he can close the distance extremely quickly and turn the fight into a 2v1. If a soldier sees a defenseless medic, he can close the distance, secure the frag, and escape with his life. He can also use his movement to get behind the other team, taking out teleporters, backline players, and forcing the other team to either chase him down or risk getting collapsed on from behind during a team fight. Soldier's greatest strength is his mobility because it gives him the potential to force these unfair fights while simultaneously being extremely difficult to kill. Learning the ins and outs of each matchup will allow you to more efficiently use your movement to your advantage. Before I get into each individual matchup, let me recap the fundamentals. I've already mentioned the idea of taking favorable fights, but Soldier's speed can also be used to avoid fights by jumping away. This is especially useful in many matchups, as you will see in a bit. Secondly, as I will certainly repeat at least a few times during this video, Soldier benefits greatly from smart positioning. Typically difficult matchups can be made simple given favorable map geometry. Do your best to play on high ground and around health packs as much as possible and use choke points and corners to your advantage. Also, make sure you're playing with your team as much as possible since taking a 2 or 3v1 with your team is pretty much always better than a 1v1. Lastly, Soldier is a very mechanically challenging class despite what some YouTube commenters might want you to believe. Many of Soldier's matchups are going to be determined largely by mechanical skill. If your aim and movement are worse than the other team's Soldier, Scout, or Demoman, you are probably going to lose the 1v1 unless your positioning is significantly better. When it comes to aim and movement, you will improve over time naturally. You can improve faster by simply playing more TF2. I will cover each matchup assuming I have the gunboats equipped, and then talk about any relevant unlocks at the end. Scout essentially soft counters Soldier. Spoiler alert, I think this matchup is much harder than Pyro versus Soldier. That being said, the beauty of playing a generalist class is that any matchup honestly isn't that bad if played correctly. When I am playing TF2, I try to base my decision making off the player and not the class they are playing. If I know the other team's Scout has bad aim, bad movement, or both, you can bet that I'm going to take the 1v1 with them every time I see them as long as I'm healthy and have ammo. If the other team's Scout has good movement but can't hit you, be patient with your rockets and wait for them to screw up their movement. If you are patient enough, you should be able to get guaranteed damage when they land from their double jump or move themselves into a corner. If the Scout has good aim but walks in straight lines, you will win the fight if you just 2-rocket them. If you happen to be playing against a Scout who has good movement and aim, the matchup gets difficult. This is the guy that you will want to avoid taking 1v1s with since he will usually demonstrate to you why this is a bad matchup for Soldier. Try to play around your team, especially your engineers if you have any. Forcing the Scout to fight a 1v2 versus your team is a good play, although since Scout is very fast, he can typically just run away. If you try to chase the Scout in this situation, be very careful because your teammate is probably not going to be able to help you when you jump to chase the Scout. You will probably encounter Scouts the most when you are on the high ground, since Scouts will also want to be on the high ground. The best time to commit to a duel versus a Scout is when you have the height and when they don't, since you will generally have a much easier time hitting splash rockets on them when you're above them. The other good time to actually commit to this 1v1 is when the Scout is caught in a choke point. You should have an easy time hitting them with splash if they are in a tight choke point. If you are forced to fight a Scout, you will want to be at very close range, but not so close that you will deal self-damage with your rockets. At this range, landing a rocket will be much easier than mid-range. You will want to be patient with your rockets if you have the health, but if the Scout is able to aim, you need to end the fight before you die. Splash is more reliable, but sometimes you have no choice but to go for the Chad Direct rocket. It is worth mentioning that if you are indoors, you have a lot of options for splash rockets, so abuse the map geometry and go for wall or ceiling splash whenever possible. Lastly, I want to mention that this matchup is actually in your favor if you're running the shotgun. With gunboats, you have to hit one good rocket and one splash rocket to kill a full health scout. Two 50 damage splash rockets will not cut it. If you have the shotgun, you can use it as a much more reliable finisher once the scout is low. Oh, also scout mains really hate the direct hit. I can't seem to figure out why for some reason, but they don't like it, so using it is not a bad idea if a scout is giving you problems. Soldier versus soldier can be another difficult matchup. Similar to scout, soldiers want to play on the high ground, so you are likely to be contested by other soldiers when you are positioned in good spots. I find myself fighting soldiers most often when we are fighting over the high ground. The first common scenario when fighting over the high ground is when you are already on the height and the enemy soldier decides to bomb you. You have a bunch of options here. The first option, and arguably the best option, is to counter-bomb the soldier. Soldier has an advantage when he is above his opponents, and counter-bombing eliminates the other soldier's height advantage while simultaneously creating your own. That being said, counter-bombing isn't always possible because of ceilings and skyboxes, and even without these, it isn't always the best play. In a vacuum, the best play is to go for the air shot. Obviously, the downside to going for the air shot is that if you miss the air shot, you wasted a rocket that you could have used to counterbomb, and now the soldier is probably going to hit you with a rocket before he lands on top of you. Instead of going for the air shot, you can try to land a direct or splash rocket on the soldier where he is landing. This is much less risky than going for an air shot, but also has less reward. Sometimes this rocket can push the soldier off the high ground, which is ideal. If you choose to commit to the fight and you don't counterbomb, you also have to subconsciously decide between some movement options. The first option you have is to attempt to surf the bomber's rocket, which usually works well against less experienced players. If you successfully surf, you are essentially counterbombing but without having to use your own rocket to jump, instead going for the air shot. This strategy is far from perfect though. Very good players will try to hit you with a direct rocket, which means you won't surf anywhere and will eat a 90 damage rocket, and then you will be in the same spot for an easy follow-up rocket. I find that when I'm getting bombed, I use my grounded movement to attempt to bait out the bomber's first rocket. If you can successfully dodge the first rocket, you have both a health advantage and an ammo advantage since the soldier used health to bomb, and also used a rocket to bomb and another rocket to shoot at you. He will then land with only 2 to 3 rockets loaded and less health than you. When using this type of movement, I usually have time to go for the air shot, and if I miss, I will still be able to hit the splash rocket on the soldier when he lands, dealing more damage than I would have if I had surfed his rocket since I am closer. The last movement option is to drop off the high ground and then rebomb. This is similar to counterbombing, but instead of using a rocket and then using some HP to jump, you can go for an air shot instead. This play essentially turns the roles of the 1v1 around. I'll talk about bombing a soldier in just a second. Of course, the last option that you have in this situation is to run away. This is a decent choice if you are low health or if the soldier has teammates to back him up, turning the fight from a 1v1 to a 2 or 3v1. Which of all these options you choose depends on the map, what the other soldier is doing, and the skill of both you and the other soldier. If you are bombing a soldier on the high ground, the fight is generally much simpler. Your goal is to avoid getting air shot and to make the best of your temporary height advantage that you get during your rocket jump. If you keep in mind the movement options that the other soldier has, you can predict what they are going to do. If they try to surf, hit them with a direct rocket. If they try to dodge your rocket, you should be able to land a good splash rocket on them if you're a little patient. Outside of these high ground fights, soldier versus soldier is pretty simple. If the other soldier has better positioning and you are unable to contest the height for whatever reason, don't commit to the fight. Similarly, if you have the better positioning, hold your ground and win the fight if he commits. Remember to play health packs, use chokes and high ground to your advantage, and play around your team. If you focus on positioning fundamentals, winning the mirror matchup is usually pretty easy. Ah yes, the classic soldier versus pyro matchup. If I had to guess, about 5% of people who clicked on this video fast forwarded straight to this section. If you're part of this 5%, I'll repeat what I said during the scout section just for you. I think Soldier's matchup versus Scout is harder than his Pyro matchup. That's right, I said it, dealing with Pyro isn't that bad as a Soldier. I imagine many people consider Pyro to be Soldier's hard counter. This is definitely an exaggeration. Sure, a really good Pyro can win most 1v1s versus Soldiers, but Soldier's true strength isn't his ability to brute force every single fight. He can't realistically win every 1v1. What Soldier can do is use his mobility to play extremely cowardly and only commit to fights that are favorable for him. And this is exactly how you counter Pyro as a Soldier. Only fight a Pyro if you know you can win. If you can't win, then why fight? Just jump away. There are situations where you might be forced to fight a Pyro, or where jumping away is not possible because of obstacles. In this case, the first step to beating Pyros is to only shoot close-range rockets. Entirely avoid shooting mid or long-range rockets at a Pyro. You are feeding them free mini-crit rockets to shoot at you and your team. I guess I should mention that you can completely ignore this advice if the player is part of the 30% of Pyro mains who play without a monitor. The best and only range to shoot rockets at a Pyro is the close range. Close range rockets are impossible to react to. The Pyro must predict when you are going to shoot and air blast accordingly. The exceptions to this rule are when the Pyro is running the flog, when they have their secondary pulled out and don't have the degreaser, or when they're not paying attention to you. Then, shooting mid-range rockets is risk-free. The second step to beating Pyros is to change up your rocket timings. The reasoning for this is obvious given my previous statement. Pyros have to predict point-blank rockets, so shooting your rockets unpredictably means that the Pyro cannot consistently reflect your shots. The safest play here is to wait until the Pyro air blasts before shooting to ensure that they cannot get a lucky prediction air blast. Most Pyros assume that you will fire rockets on cooldown, so you can attempt to bait out an air blast by waiting a second after your rocket is reloaded before firing. You don't necessarily have to wait for the Pyro to air blast, and sometimes you won't have enough health to be able to, so in this case, just try to change up the timings the best that you can. The final and arguably most crucial step to beating Pyros is to abuse map geometry. Using corners versus a Pyro is the final prevention measure of the Pyro ever doing anything useful. Not only are close-range rockets difficult to reflect if you're doing step 1 and 2 properly, but they are also almost impossible for the Pyro to deal any damage with if reflected because the corner is in the way. For a Pyro to actually win a fight against you when you are following all these steps, they have to hit you with their flames, move their crosshair to the perfect spot so that the reflected rocket is going to splash you, and then perfectly predict your rocket. Some Pyros absolutely refuse to walk at a soldier, probably because they realize that being at very close range is actually bad for them in this case. I find that these Pyros get to a range where they can react to a rocket and then just sit there. These guys will stare at you for eternity, entirely focused on reflecting the rocket that you aren't going to shoot at them. If the Pyro is doing this, remember step 1 of the method. Don't shoot rockets that the Pyro can react and reflect. These Pyros never, and I mean never, actually shoot flames at me in this situation. They just wait. I honestly think some of them might not have mouse 1 bound to attack. In this case, I usually walk towards them menacingly and wait for them to panic and right-click. Once they air blast, I can shoot a rocket at them. Sometimes after getting hit by a rocket, the Pyro will panic and reset to the factory default settings and start shooting flames. This is when you change up the timing and shoot another rocket instantly, sending them back to the spawn room and making them question their decision to choose the Pyro class. This matchup, just like Soldier and Scout, benefits from remembering the skill of your opponents. Sometimes you play against Pyros who can't reflect anything. You don't have to avoid shooting rockets at these guys. The last thing I should mention is if an enemy Pyro is giving you difficulty still, switching to the shotgun makes the matchup easier for obvious reasons. Also, the direct hit increases the range that rockets are impossible to react to, so it can be useful in this matchup as well. This section is going to be pretty short because the ideal strategy for fighting a Demoman when you are playing Soldier is pretty simple. Get really close to the Demoman and shoot him with rockets. And when I say really close, I mean really close. You want to be just far enough away that you aren't dealing self-damage with your rockets. If you engage in a fight with a Demoman at mid-range, you are giving him an advantage by allowing him to play at his ideal range. This far away, his stickies will deal just as much damage as your rockets, and he is twice the clip size. Also, he can two-shot you with his grenades, and you are unable to two-shot a full health demo at mid-range. Like I said, the solution to this is to get into the Demoman's personal space. This way, your rockets are going to two-shot him, and he risks dealing self-damage with his grenades. Again, your rockets also deal self-damage, but this isn't really a big deal since you can aim your rockets behind the demo so that they will splash him and not you. If you are playing against a really good Demoman, this strategy can still be very risky since he can two-shot you at close range. It is ideal to get an overheal from a medic before taking any fight, but fighting a Demoman, having an overheal is incredibly useful since you will no longer be two-shot by grenades. Demoman is kind of overpowered, so it's usually worth trading your life for a demo pick if the demo player is actually good. Good demos will usually be aware that you want to close the distance on them and will position themselves around teammates to prevent you from getting to force a 1v1. In this case, you could attempt to trade, but usually it's better to preserve your life. This positioning can be annoying, especially since demos are very good at spamming you off the high ground. If you aren't able to get close to the demo, you can attempt to win the spam fight, and if you have to, you can jump away to a safer spot. I should also mention here, if you're playing against a demo knight, you shouldn't really have any trouble at all. Just avoid getting crit charged and stay out of melee range and you will be fine. At this point, I've already talked about all the hard matchups, and now it's just smooth sailing. Heavy is definitely the underdog in this matchup, but you should be cautious when fighting a heavy. One bad decision can really easily lose you the fight. The best way to guarantee victory when fighting a heavy is, you guessed it, abuse map geometry. Heavy needs line of sight to deal damage, and you don't, so therefore use corners and high ground to break line of sight to protect your hitbox. If I encounter a heavy out in the open where there are no corners to play, I almost always just jump away. The only exception to this is if the heavy is unaware of me and is not spun up and is also not overhealed. If I am close range and I can hit one rocket without the heavy starting to spin up, I can out DPS the heavy. You can kill a full health heavy with 3 rockets up close, but you have to be close and land direct rockets. This is still somewhat risky since the Delocus bar exists, and also because if you mess up and miss a rocket, you might die. It can also be okay to fight a heavy in the open if he is busy doing something else, like fighting your teammates. If the heavy is distracted, you can even get away with bombing him. You won't want to do this if the heavy is focused on you, unless you have some good high ground to land on, and even then it's still probably not a good idea because the heavy can shred you when you are midair. If you keep all this in mind, heavies should be no problem for you. The only time you will really die to the heavy is if you're surprised by him. This is a somewhat rare occurrence if you are playing carefully and listening for his minigun, but in the event the heavy gets the drop on you, you have a few options. You could attempt to win the fight by dodging for long enough to kill the heavy. This is not the greatest option since Soldier's boots on the ground movement speed is very slow, so you're easy to track, but it can work if the heavy isn't very good. The second and arguably better option is to attempt to surf the heavy's bullets away to safety. Depending on the positioning, you could also rocket jump to safety as well. Jumping away is probably the best place since you are minimizing the amount of damage you are taking from the heavy, meaning if the heavy spins down and starts to walk forward, you might be able to punish him for overextending just a few seconds later. The last thing I should mention is that with the gunboats, killing a heavy with a medic can be very hard because he has so much health and you have only 4 rockets. In this case, the shotgun can be helpful if you can't rely on your team to focus fire the heavy with you. Engineer is just like the heavy. He is the underdog when fighting a soldier, but if the soldier makes a mistake, he can lose very quickly. The most obvious case is when I am not paying attention, only to realize I'm bombing into a seemingly randomly placed engineer nest that would have been simple to take out had I been listening to my game audio. I guess the takeaway here is to pay attention and listen for the sound that sentries make, especially when you are behind enemy lines, since for some reason engineers love to just randomly build a nest on a point their team isn't even defending yet. As long as you aren't caught off guard by a sentry, engineer is pretty easy to deal with. You can just shoulder peek a sentry to spam it out, and if the engineer decides he wants to 1v1 you, he is an easy target for your rocket launcher. As a soldier, you can typically take out engineers and their nests by yourself. If you're playing against one of the few sentient engineer players, then they will probably be running the Wrangler. In this case, you are going to have a much harder time killing the nest alone since your rockets do a pitiful amount of damage against wrangled guns. You will have to rely on your team to help you take out the sentry, or you can wait for the engineer to wrangle the gun and bomb in an attempt to kill the engineer. Speaking of teams, your own team will usually be your biggest enemy when fighting an engineer. If a sentry is well placed and the enemy team is actually holding map control, getting enough space to spam on a gun can be a nightmare. Engineer really shines when his team is actually playing around him. The direct hit can certainly help in this situation, but these games can be quite challenging nevertheless. If you're playing against Battle Engineer, you will probably have more opportunities to 1v1 since Battle Engie typically plays on the flank. These guys are usually easy pickings since Soldier is just much more well equipped for 1v1s. Just do your best to avoid fighting the Engineer and his mini sentry at the same time, and kill the minis whenever you can to help out the scouts and pyros on your team. Lastly, I just want to thank all the Engineer players who put their dispensers in corners or in the perfect spot for me to shoot rockets at from the high ground. TF2 players tend to congregate inside dispensers, and this sets up really easy multi-kills. I'm gonna need you to go ahead and keep doing that. That would be great. Oh, one more thing. If the engineer is abusing the short circuit, the shotgun can be a great choice. As I mentioned in my Demoman matchups video, Medic himself isn't much of a threat to you. It's his patience that you have to worry about. Once you have dealt with his heal targets, Medic is almost entirely defenseless. Dealing with his team is easier said than done though. Good medics are efficient at building Uber and providing their team with overheals and burst heals from the Crusader's crossbow. In the presence of a good medic, you will have to be extra careful picking your fights because your opponents will be overhealed often. Matchups are made even more difficult if the medic is actively healing your opponent. Like I have said before, running away is always an option, but it honestly isn't necessary most of the time. If you focus on the fundamentals, you can win matchups even against players who are getting healed. The biggest threat to you and your team is Uber charge. Obviously, you cannot damage Ubered players, so it is almost always best to rocket jump away if you encounter an Uber. You could jump behind if you have an opportunity to take out unubered backline players and set up a pinch with your team when the Uber ends. You can also jump away to safety and recommit when the Uber ends. The key here is when the Uber ends. The shiny players take no damage, but you still do, so you don't want to be anywhere near them. If the Uber is not looking at you at all, you can even get away with staying put and shooting the unubered players behind the Uber. This is a bit risky, but you can usually tell when the Ubered player is not focused on you. As a soldier, you are well equipped to avoid getting caught by an Uber. Many other classes don't have the ability to just run away, so your team will have to rely on good positioning. Finding a team that positions well in a pub is less likely than spotting a unicorn, so you will usually want to prevent the other team from getting Uber in the first place. Medic is probably the best class for you to trade for. If you see an opportunity to get a medic kill, it is usually worth it even if you end up dying for it. Whether or not you are able to secure a med frag can be difficult to tell since it depends on your mechanics as well as the medic player and his team. Oftentimes you will have to make a split-second decision as an opportunity presents itself. This game sense and the mechanics required to follow up on the instincts come with time. Just remember that good medic players will try to surf your rockets to get away and adjust accordingly. Like I said, this matchup is more so based off the skill of the medic's heal target, so as long as you can avoid dying to the medic's pocket, you should have no problem dealing with the medic himself. I am sure many people think of switching to Spy or Sniper when facing a sniper who is dominating the server, but in my personal experience, Soldier is actually Sniper's hardest counter. Since I just got done talking about trading with a medic, I'll point out that trading for a sniper who is good at hitting his shots is also very worth it. This is very based off of the skill of the player. If the sniper isn't very good, then I would avoid committing to trade for him. You can usually guarantee these trades in the same way you can get a medic trade, high bombing at your target. Once you land next to a sniper, the fight is certainly in your favor, but you will have to be more careful since, unlike medic, sniper can point blank quickscope you for 150 damage if you are not careful. If the sniper is near a lot of teammates, which they often are, you probably won't be able to secure the kill. In this case, it is best to play versus sniper like every other class plays against sniper. Avoid peeking the sightlines whenever possible, and do your best to prevent the sniper from peeking in the first place by maintaining map control. As I have mentioned in the past, as a soldier you are well equipped to lock down choke points, which is key to keeping space. If the sniper is unable to get posted up on a good sightline, he is no threat to you and your team. Other than deciding whether or not to bomb a sniper, the other time I find myself commonly interacting with a sniper is when I get behind the enemy team. Most snipers are pretty oblivious and are easily two-rocketed in this situation. It is usually best to wait until you are pretty close to shoot your first rocket. This way, you are guaranteeing you kill the sniper in only 2 rockets. If you shoot your rocket too early, you might not be able to secure the kill with an easy splash rocket. That is pretty much all I have to say about Sniper. He isn't a very interactive class. You shouldn't have too much of a problem dealing with him unless both the sniper and his team are really good. In that case, good luck. Most people associate Pyro with countering Spy, and while Pyro is certainly good at it, I think Soldier is also a fantastic Spy counter. Spy likes to be behind enemy lines. It's kind of the only thing he's good at. This means when he is in his ideal positioning, he is completely isolated from his team. When a soldier spots a spy behind his team, he can commit to chase that spy and guarantee a 1v1 because of this. If the spy tries to cloak to run away, you should be able to catch him most of the time. Soldier's large splash rockets are very good at finding and tracking an invisible spy. And when I say very good, I mean it. This happens all the time in my games. Spy hunting is one of my favorite pastimes as a soldier in pubs because it's so fun and it's great. I love it. Anyways, if the spy doesn't want to run away after getting caught, the fight is still very much in your favor. The spy is obviously outgunned, so 9 times out of 10, he's a free kill for you. Most spies realize this and will try to avoid direct combat with the soldier and only go for backstabs on a distracted soldier. The key to not getting backstabbed is simply awareness. When you are in a safe spot reloading rockets, look around for spy. When you are not busy, look around for spy. If you see a spy fighting a teammate, use your mobility to turn it into a 2v1. When you are spawning, pay attention to the wall hacks that you get to secure an occasional free spy kill. If a teammate does anything out of the ordinary, hell, if a teammate is acting perfectly normal, spy check them anyways. Probably the most important thing to do when you are playing against spies is to listen. When you hear the very distinct of somebody getting backstabbed, turn around. When you hear the your eternal reward, turn around. When you hear the Invis Watch or Cloak and Dagger decloak sound, turn around. You are going to catch so many spies by simply being aware of your surroundings and just listening. Speaking of catching spies, you don't even need to be aware to catch a spy as a soldier. There are so many ways a spy can get fucked over by simply existing, it's honestly hilarious. You can catch an invisible spy when spamming a sentry. Sometimes you will kill a spy accidentally when rocket jumping. Other times, a spy gets unlucky and gets hit with spam meant for his teammates. Spy players are predictable and have habits. Over time, you will catch on more and more to these habits and you will die less and less to spy. I guess this is a good time to mention that sometimes the spy will just get you. That being said, most spies are not a threat at all to even a semi-aware player, but the very best spies can still be very difficult to fight. Skilled spy players do exist, they are just rare. These guys still have habits, but they are different from other spies. In my experience, these guys fall into 2 categories. The revolver demons who rarely use their knife, and the trick stab bros who simply cannot resist going for flashy surf stabs and other shenanigans. Dealing with the latter of the 2 is far simpler. Shoot them with a direct rocket when they try to surf off your rocket for a surf stab. If they do manage to surf your rocket, be ready to counterbomb so you don't end up in their frag movie. If you find yourself in a lobby with one of the rare god-tier gun spies, you will have to watch your back. These guys are usually pretty good at picking 1v1s with low health players, so be careful when backing up for HP. If you are both full health, the fight is still better for you, just be careful since you will probably have to 3-rocket them since most of these guys run Dead Ringer. Okay, that was every single class, I am done talking now. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm on their med. Med's alone in yard. Get away from me!